Hi, it's Matt here from Apita, and today I'm talking with one of my colleagues, Catherine, about a recent project that they've been working on. Thanks for joining me today, Catherine.
Hi, Matt.
So today, Catherine, I want to talk about learning design principles, and I want to talk to you about your experience recently with a project. We won't go too deep into the project particulars, but essentially the client was a provider of short courses, mainly in the business and communications industry. And I guess what was interesting about this situation is that you were brought in after the project had started. And this is going to be a really common experience for many learning designers out there, because really you can be brought into a project at any stage and be asked to hit the ground running straight away. So when this occurs, what are some of the most important things a learning designer should aim to get their head around first? And if we use this project as an example, what was provided to you initially to help you with that?
I think with this project, we were really lucky in that the internal design team had created an entire learning designer and SME pack that we were provided with from the get-go. When you're brought into a project and you do need to hit the ground running, it's important that you can do that and that your productivity is there from the start. So if you have lots and lots of questions, it can slow you down, substantially at the beginning. So our pack was a really useful tool. So within the pack, because there was a collaborative element with our SMEs, there was an SME playbook that explained to the SME what their role was. There was also a learning designer playbook that had all the information that involved the role of the learning designer and what was expected there. And then we also had a set of templates. So we had the top level design, which was called the blueprint. We also had a storyboard template, and then we had all of the PowerPoint templates and the formats that everything had to be provided in.
Awesome. Sounds like a piece of IKEA furniture. You didn't just throw those instructions out and do it all on your own, did you?
No. Very, very, very clear instructions, yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's interesting. So I like those terms playbook, because I guess no matter where you work or whatever your client is, there are going to be different terms sort of thrown around. You've mentioned some key ones there: blueprints, storyboards, ways of working, but I really like that sort of term playbook. So we've got the playbook here. What I'll do is maybe I'll share that and we can talk through that. And maybe you can explain what that sort of was. So I've got it up here on the screen there. And I guess just looking at the contents page, it's got some really sort of key terms there, doesn't it? Ways of working, the overall design approach, and the design formula. What did they sort of entail?
Well, as a learning designer, there are lots of different facets to the role. Now, in some projects, you may be brought in at the very beginning and you will actually help to define those ways of working and the approach to design. So you would be an instrumental part of that. Now, if you're joining an existing team, then obviously this will already be in place. So the ways of working explained the collaboration with the subject matter expert. They were managed by the client. Sometimes they may have been internal staff members, or they may have been external subject matter experts. So this was setting the expectations around the deliverables of timelines, how we would communicate any issues with the internal team, the actual process. So the point at which we created objectives, the kickoff meetings, creating blueprints, storyboards, all the way through to the full development cycle.
So that's the development cycle there, isn't it? Really, that little graphic that kind of steps you through the process. Yeah.
Yes, and you can see there from that was quite a short timeline. So knowing these ways of working and having these expectations set up front and having them clear are really important.
Yeah. Could you explain maybe this little design formula graphic there? That kind of looks interesting, and looking at that with a fresh set of eyes, it might be a little bit confusing at first. How did you understand that?
I think one of the really useful things was, as well, we were provided with an exemplar course, so we could log on to the client's LMS and we could see, one they'd made earlier, so to speak. And that gave us an opportunity to look at this design formula and then see it actually brought to life in the platform.
Yeah.
But basically, these were all short courses. So within each short course, there were 3 topics that were covered during it. And in order to give it some structure, each topic was broken down into 3 learning objectives, and they related to 3 types of learning design principle. So it was
Awesome.
it was a really nice format, very clear.
And so I can see here, I guess, in this sort of playbook, there's 2 things that really stick out to me, and that's these 2 key points here. So this is all about constructive alignment, isn't it? And making sure that these activities that are created, that a learning designer coming into the project knows that all these learning activities need to be strongly aligned to the learning objectives and the outcomes of the actual course. So that's really important, yeah. And the second thing, I guess, the benefit of this type of document is to make sure that everyone's on the same page about how to label and promote those learning activities. So it's very clear here that the words you're using, so it's almost like the nomenclature, is activate, learn, and apply. And they're acting, I guess, as calls to action, aren't they? I think there's another page here which sort of highlighted those calls to action, what the explanation was, and some examples of them as well. So it was really important for you to be provided with all of that sort of up front, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Awesome. Now, I guess the other thing alongside this is what's often called, I guess, a style guide. And a style guide is more, I guess, the colours and the fonts to be used. But styling is much more than just the graphics, yeah? It also includes the style of writing and the narrative used.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 2 things here. When you work with a range of subject matter experts, each SME that we collaborate with, they of course have their own distinctive voice. And so it's really important that the voice of the SME still comes through. Yeah. But the style of writing for online tends to be more conversational. Otherwise, if it's quite an academic style, it can come across a little bit heavy, and it's not quite as engaging. So because there's no typically face-to-face contact, obviously you've got video, so you hear people talking, but the style of writing is far more conversational. We had examples in the existing course that we could look at, because sometimes you'd wonder a little bit like, how far can you go with this? You know, sometimes it's okay to use a little bit of humour, and sometimes it's definitely not. So it really is checking in, and in those first few interactions with a new client is actually checking where the benchmarks are. So looking at previous examples, looking at the style that people write in, and then, you know, the desired output, getting the definite yeses and the definite nos.
Yeah. So every SME, like you said, is different, but also learning designers as well. I mean, on bigger projects, you might be working within a team where there's multiple modules, multiple topics. And, you know, between me and you, we'd have different styles of writing as well. And so that's why these playbooks or these blueprints are really important to ensure that those expectations are set up front, isn't it? Yeah. Because the learners, from a learner point of view, they don't know that there's multiple learning designers. They don't care that there's multiple learning designers working in the background. They want to see a consistency in terms of not only the interface and those colors and fonts, but they also want a consistency in that language used in those calls to action, so that as they move throughout each module, they get into the habit and they know sort of where to go.
There's a fine line really between you don't want to create kind of an experience that's a little bit like a patchwork quilt. You know, so everything looks like it's sort of patched together and has come from all over the place. But you also don't want to go down that cookie cutter route and everything be so the same. So things like navigation, format, expectations, they should all be consistent. And then the uniqueness comes through with each SME and their sort of individual take. But it's a little bit of push and pull to get that right.
Yeah, it certainly can be, yeah. So as you move into the next stage of the project, you're starting to really narrow down the content into storyboards, aren't you? And that term storyboard, whether it's applicable for an IT company or a film set, a storyboard tells the story, doesn't it? It lays it out in the order in which it wants to be, it should be presented. And this is what then gets taken and published into the LMS, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were given some storyboard templates. I think we can call one up now, and you can talk us through that. Let's have a look. So I think my experience with storyboards, similar to this, they're never anything glamorous, and they certainly don't end up looking like obviously what's going to go inside the LMS, but they're functional, aren't they? And they need to be clear in terms of, I guess, the naming conventions and version control and things like that. But once you move past that, sort of explain as we get down how you then inputted the content into these storyboards.
Well, the storyboarding was a collaborative approach with our subject matter expert. So we would create the blueprint, the top level design, and then we would transfer this across into the storyboard and then start to build it out, adding in comments for the subject matter expert to fill in the gaps throughout the process. So one of the biggest lessons learned is to set those ways of working with the SME up front, with the expectation that you're going to be using either something like Teams or Google Docs, so that you've got an online collaborative workspace. Because one of the key challenges is if you have different versions floating around on email, and you've got a subject matter expert working on one version of a storyboard that they're emailing across, then that becomes a whole job in itself.
Yeah.
So to maintain that version control and to keep everything in place, because we're working for a client, often as a freelancer, so things shouldn't be living in individual inboxes, they should all be held centrally. So once you've got your ways of working, you've got a collaborative space, then really it's making that collaboration experience with the SME as smooth as possible. So what I find is if you can give information and instruction up front, it's much easier to get those first drafts coming through in the right format, rather than in a busy project. The SMEs are very, very time challenged. So if what they provide to us first off has got to be reworked, giving them feedback, them doing the rework, that is going to take some time. And it's quite frustrating for them as well, understandably. So in this particular project, I started to add in different tips. So instead of just insert video, it was like, what kind of video? How many will we have? What do I wear? How long should they be? So, and making them.
So it's almost like you had not just the storyboard, but also like a guidelines document or best tips kind of document as well.
Yeah, that was something that that evolved, and I think this is the beauty of joining a project. You start off by running with what's already there, and then you continue to develop it really based on the lessons learned as you go through. So really it was a case of highlighting the parts where the SME needed to input. Otherwise, the storyboard, as you can see, it's quite daunting, but a lot of that is handled by the learning designer.
Yep.
And we put instructions in for developers too.
Yeah, and coming back, I guess, to that consistent style of writing as well. When you've got the storyboard in here, you're introducing. You've got that narrative of that consistent narrative. So every topic's going to start with that. It's going to tell the learner what they're going to do. They're going to understand what it means to, and this could be one of the sort of learning outcomes. And then you've got your activate, learn, and apply there as well. So yeah, when you're setting up a storyboard from scratch, the typical approach would be to set it up similar to this, using tables, using rows or columns, whatever fits. And like you said, if needed, also including instructions in there as well on how to use the storyboard, not just providing a bit of a blank slate, because you'll find that each SME often interacts with them in a different way, don't they? Some might just leave the comments in there, some might just do a whole cut and paste. So I think, like you said before, it's really important to get those first couple right so that you get onto a good way of working there.
Even little things like in the end, it evolved into SME instruction was highlighted in yellow. So they expected, okay, I see the yellow gaps, that's me.
Yeah.
Anything for developers was highlighted in green.
Yep.
So they knew they didn't have to worry about that.
Mm.
And then everything in between in the with all black and white, that was left to the learning designer.
Yeah. Yeah, that color is a good way. It's easy to put in an email, you know, can you please fill in or contribute to the section
gap
marked as yellow? Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Okay, so to wrap up, you're basically provided with a set of learning design principles, and even though I guess different organizations and clients, they might have different names for that process. In this instance, they called it a playbook. Other instances, they might call it a blueprint or ways of working. But basically, the goal of it was to provide a document that made sure that there was constructive alignment between the courses and between the topics, consistency, not just in terms of the visual look of what the course is going to look like, but in terms of the terms used, the calls to action used, the narrative voice there. And you also, you know, a lot of guidance in that document on what types of active and social learning to include. You know, you mentioned those apply and learn and things like that. So to wrap up, any final thoughts or any recommendations for our budding learning designers out there?
I think this was a really good project to work on because we could see the big picture. And I think that's really important for any learning designer, not just to be working in isolation on your part of it, but if you can understand what the big picture is, what the goal is, and then you've got, in this case, we had all the pieces of our jigsaw. We had the templates, we had the playbook with all that tacit information in, not just the explicit, you know, here's the format, etc. So yeah, we had everything. So I think that was the key. And if you don't have all that information as a learning designer, then maybe those are some of the things that you can start to seek out in a new project. You know, you've got that terminology, so you know what it is that you need to ask for.
Yeah, I guess like you just mentioned there, sometimes you might start a project and you might be involved right at those initial stages. And so, you know, hopefully this video has also given people some tips for if they are involved in those initial stages, what to include. Guys out there, people out there, you can call it whatever you like, use whatever term you want, but you know what the essential information is to include in your documents. All right, awesome. That was great. Thanks very much for joining and sharing your insights today, Catherine.
All right, thank you very much, Matt.
No problem.